Imagine a night when the wind doesn't just blow, it howls. The trees bend under the weight of the snow, and every branch looks like a hand reaching out in the darkness. You're on a narrow road in the mountains of Japan, and everything around you is white, silent, almost lifeless. It's the kind of night where even the flame of a lantern seems afraid to exist. Your steps sink into the soft snow. The cold cuts your face, and the air in your lungs burns like ice. Somewhere in the distance, there might be a village, a cabin, a bit of warmth. But in the middle of this empty white, something changes. The mist thickens, the temperature drops in a strange way. And, for a second, you get the feeling you're not alone, as if a pair of eyes were watching every step you take. It's in this setting, between silence and wind, that ancient Japan placed one of its most enigmatic figures, Yuki-Onna, the snow woman. A spirit that appears when winter is at its peak, when the border between life and death becomes as thin as a thread of ice. Some see her as a warning, others as punishment, and a few believe that behind her cold face there might still be a trace of compassion. Before we dive into this story, a quick invitation. If you enjoy traveling through legends from all over the world, through myths that mix fear, beauty, and mystery, take a second to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. That way, you'll keep walking these ancient roads with me, roads where sometimes spirits still walk beside the living. Today, we're going to cross the blizzards of Japanese folklore to understand who Yuki-Onna is, where she came from, the promise she made to a young woodcutter, and how a simple secret can seal the fate of an entire life. The origin of the snow spirit. The legend of Yuki-Onna was born in a very different Japan from the one we know today, when isolated villages depended entirely on the weather to live or die. In the winter months, the path between one house and another could disappear under the snow. One wrong step meant getting lost, freezing, not returning. And when a threat is constant, humans do what they have always done. They give it a name, a face, a story. By the fire, inside wooden houses, elders gathered children to tell stories. It wasn't just entertainment, it was a way to teach respect for the mountains, the snow, and the cold. In those tales, winter wasn't just a season, but a presence, a someone that needed to be treated carefully. Yuki-Onna slowly emerged from that image. Snow, as a woman, beautiful enough to be impossible to ignore, dangerous enough to never be underestimated. With time, her figure spread through different regions of Japan. In each province, a detail changed. Sometimes she appeared as a sad young woman, in others as a cold and distant entity. In some places, as a spirit wandering in search of something she had lost. But the core of the story stayed the same. She showed up on stormy nights, found humans lost in the snow, and in some way decided their fate. Yuki-Onna fits into a Japanese tradition full of spiritual beings. Forest kami, river spirits, ghosts of betrayed loves, souls trapped between worlds. Each of these beings reflects human fears and desires like a mirror. In her case, the mirror is made of ice. It shows fear of the cold, loneliness, and silent death, but also fascination for what is beautiful and unreachable. Beauty that freezes. Appearance and powers. Yuki-Onna is described in most stories as a woman of almost hypnotic beauty. Tall, slender, with skin so pale it looks like compressed snow. Her white kimono blends into the landscape, and sometimes only the contrast of her long black hair reveals that there really is someone standing there in the middle of the storm. Other versions say her hair is also white, as if the blizzard itself had taken human form. Her eyes change depending on the tale. They can be blue, cold, shining like ice under the moonlight, or dark and deep, like a bottomless winter well. In every case, there is something in them that sends a shiver down your spine. It's not just fear, it's the feeling of being weighed and judged by a gaze that comes from somewhere outside our world. Yuki-Onna doesn't need to scream to scare. Her presence alone changes the atmosphere. Her most famous power is her icy breath. In many versions, she approaches the victim, leans in close, and exhales a breath so cold that the blood seems to stop flowing. The person loses strength, color, and life, turning into a statue of ice abandoned in the snow. In other stories, she hardly does anything. She simply watches, and the cold around her does the rest, as if her very presence intensified the winter. One important detail: Yuki-Onna moves without leaving footprints. While the human sinks into the snow, struggling with every step, she glides, light and silent, like a white shadow. Sometimes she's seen holding a baby, asking someone to carry it. Sometimes she appears knocking on the door of a cabin, asking for shelter. In every case, there's the feeling of a test. What would you do if someone that beautiful and that threatening appeared on a night when any choice could cost you your life? The encounter in the blizzard, one of the most famous versions of the legend, tells the story of two woodcutters, an older, more experienced man and a young one named Minikichi. They worked in the mountains and, one afternoon, were caught by a snowstorm far stronger than they expected. The wind grew so violent that walking became almost impossible. Snow fell as if the entire sky were breaking apart into white pieces. Exhausted, they found a small wooden shelter by an almost frozen river and decided to spend the night there. The plan was simple: survive until morning. Inside the shelter, the cold was almost as intense as outside, but at least the wind wasn't knocking them down. The older man, worn out, fell asleep first. Minikichi tried to stay awake, but tiredness eventually took over. In the middle of the night, a strange gust of wind seemed to sweep through the shelter, even though everything was closed. Minikichi felt something icy pass over his face, like a breath coming from very close by. He opened his eyes and saw an impossible scene: a woman entirely dressed in white, standing and leaning over the older man. Her kimono looked like it was made of snow itself, and her dark hair fell like a shadow across the woodcutter's chest. The young man couldn't move. It was as if fear had frozen him from the inside out. He watched as the woman leaned even closer, blew something over his companion's face, and then stood still. The older man's body started to grow rigid, covered by a thin layer of frost. In a few moments, he was completely motionless. The cold had won, but Minikichi was still breathing. And that was exactly what caught the attention of the snow woman. The promise that could never be broken. The woman turned toward Minikichi. Up close, he saw that she was unrealistically beautiful, almost too perfect. At the same time, her gaze held something distant, as if it didn't belong to this world. She approached slowly. Minikichi felt the air grow even colder, as if the entire winter had condensed into that single moment. For a few seconds, she just stared at him, examining him. He was young. His face still carried dreams, fears, an entire life ahead. Maybe that stirred something in her that still remembered what it was like to be human. Instead of exhaling her deadly frost, she spoke. Her voice was soft, but sharp like mountain wind. She said something like, "Tonight, I could take your life, just as I took his. But I will spare you. There is one condition. You must never tell anyone what you saw here. Never speak of me. Never mention my face, my presence, my voice. If one day you break this promise, I will return, and you will not get a second chance." Terrified but also incredibly relieved to still be alive, Minikichi listened. Before he could answer, the snow woman dissolved into mist. A strong wind swept through the shelter, and when everything went back to normal, she was gone. The young man fainted. In the morning, villagers found him shivering beside the frozen body of his older companion. He went back to the village, carrying not only the traumatic memory of that night, but also a secret, the promise he made to a spirit. And like many promises made in extreme moments, it seemed impossible to forget. At least for a while. The woman called Years went by. Minikichi continued living in the village, working, trying to move on. The shock of that stormy night slowly turned into a silent weight. He rarely thought about it directly, but the mark of that experience was always there, like an invisible scar. Life, however, kept moving. And at some point, it brought someone new. One day, Minikichi met a young woman who had recently arrived in the region. Her name was Oyuki. She was gentle, polite, but there was something different about her. Her skin was extremely white, almost translucent. Her face was beautiful in a quiet way. Her eyes were deep, sometimes a little melancholic. People said she had lost her parents and had nowhere else to go. Over time, the two of them grew closer. Oyuki wasn't just beautiful, She was hard-working, kind to the neighbors, affectionate with Minnie. Little by little, the young woodcutter, who had survived almost certain death, began to believe that fate had given him a second chance. Not only to live, but to build something. They got married, formed a family, and had children. The house was simple, but filled with laughter, small footsteps, the noise of life. Curiously, even in the harshest winters, Oyuki didn't seem bothered by the cold. Sometimes she went outside wearing fewer layers than the rest of the family. Her cheeks didn't turn red, her fingers didn't seem to suffer. She simply walked through the snow as if she had been born from it. Some neighbors found it strange, but let it go. For Minakichi, it was just one more peculiarity of the woman he loved. The confession. On a winter night time passed, and Minakichi grew old. The children grew up, the house remained full, but winters felt heavier on him. On an especially cold night, while the wind beat against the walls and the family went to bed early, Minakichi stayed awake, watching the fire slowly die. The memory of that old night in the mountain shelter came back strongly, as if it had happened yesterday. Maybe because of his age, maybe because he felt he had already lived almost everything, he had the urge to talk. Oyuki was nearby, sewing in silence, lit by the soft glow of the lamp. He began to tell the story. He described the friend who died, frozen, the shelter in the blizzard, the woman in white, the icy breath, the threat, and the promise. While Minakichi spoke, Oyuki kept sewing, without interrupting, without reacting. But something in the air changed. When he finished, the thread in her hands seemed to break on its own. Slowly, she lifted her face. Her eyes, once so human, now seemed to reflect the same distant light from that night in the mountains. Then, with a calm that was more frightening than any scream, she said something that froze his blood. I told you that if you spoke of this night, I would return. He understood immediately. The woman who had slept beside him for years, who had given him children, who had shared entire winters with him, was the same Yuki-Onna from that stormy night. From this point on, the versions of the legend diverge. In some, she keeps her promise in a merciless way. She takes Minakichi's life right there, leaving the children without a father and disappearing into the snow shortly after. In others, she looks at the sleeping children and hesitates. She says she won't kill him because of them, but warns that if he ever mistreats them, she will return. Then, she vanishes forever. In every version, though, the message is the same. There are promises that cannot be broken, especially those you make when you're face to face with death. What the legend wants to tell you. Us behind all the supernatural atmosphere, the legend of Yuki-Onna talks about very human things. The first is respect for nature. In ancient Japan, winter was a real threat, capable of destroying crops, families, and entire villages. Turning the cold into a beautiful, dangerous woman was a way to give that risk a face, making it easier to understand and respect. Another important layer is the value of your word. Minakichi only survives because he accepts one condition: silence. When he breaks that promise years later, he proves he has forgotten the weight of that moment. The legend seems to ask us, how often do we treat serious promises as if they were just words thrown into the wind? In his case, the price comes in the form of a spirit who does not forget. Yuki-Onna also reflects fears and ideas about femininity in that culture. The image of a woman who can be wife, mother, and destructive force at the same time. She mixes love and danger, tenderness and threat. This echoes a universal fear, the fear of loving something that can hurt us, whether that something is a person, an addiction, a place, or even a memory. Finally, there is the theme of boundaries, between life and death, warmth and cold, human and supernatural, secrecy and confession. The story suggests that there are borders you shouldn't cross lightly, and that, when you do, something in your life freezes, even if you keep breathing. Variations and modern echoes over the centuries. Yuki-Onna's figure has transformed. In some regions of Japan, she is seen as completely cruel, a hunter of travelers who freezes anyone she finds in the snow, with no chance of mercy. In others, she is more complex. She tests people, punishes some, spares others, almost like a frozen judge of the human heart. Some stories show her carrying a baby, asking someone to hold it. As the person holds the baby, the weight increases until it becomes unbearable, like a block of ice. Those who endure it to the end are rewarded with their lives. Those who give up are left to the cold. In this version, the legend speaks about endurance, sacrifice, and the ability to carry someone else's weight. In the modern world, Yuki-Onna has left the old villages and entered books, films, manga, anime, and games. She appears as a villain, an anti-heroine, or a sad spirit who wants to feel warmth, just for a moment. Even in works where her name isn't mentioned, the archetype of the woman in white in the snow keeps showing up, silent, pale, surrounded by blizzards, bringing a mix of beauty and danger. Today, when snow falls over cities full of lights, there are still people who tell stories about a lonely figure standing in the middle of the white, staring at the lit windows. Maybe it's just imagination. Maybe it's the way the legend found to stay alive, even in a world that has forgotten what it's like to walk alone in the dark mountain night. When the snow calls your name, come back. For a moment, to that first image, the frozen night, the covered road, the howling wind. Now you know that, in the Japanese imagination, this scene was never empty. Somewhere in the mist, Yuki-Onna might be standing still, watching those who pass by, quietly deciding whether a heart deserves to live, to die, or to carry a secret for the rest of its life. She is more than a scary ghost. She is a symbol of what haunts us inside, our fear of what we can't control, the weight of the promises we make, the risk of forgetting that nature and life demand respect. At the same time, in versions where she chooses to spare someone, there is a spark of mercy at the core of the coldest winter. And now I want to hear from you. Did this legend resonate with something you feel or have lived through? Is there, in your country, a story in which nature itself gains a face, a voice and a will, a mountain with a spirit, a judging river, a forest that protects or punishes? If there is, tell me in the comments. Your story might become one of the next videos in our World Myths collection. And if you want to keep traveling through these legends with me, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and share this video with someone who loves mysterious stories. Because somewhere out there, while the snow falls in silence, another legend is just waiting for someone to tell it.